Ladies and gentlemen, there is a moment in every relationship, every situation, where words lose their power, where no explanation, no debate, and no long conversation will do what one simple action can achieve: silence. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is strategy. It is strength. It's the quiet roar that says, I know my worth, and I don't need to beg you to see it. See, attention is the most valuable currency you own. Every time you chase, argue, over-explain, or try to fix someone who isn't meeting you halfway, you are spending your attention on something that yields no return. But when you go silent, when you withdraw your energy, you stop feeding the problem. You stop giving someone the reaction they expect, and suddenly the power shifts. That silence, it creates mystery, it makes people question, it forces them to reflect in the quiet that follows your absence. And whether they admit it or not, they notice. Because silence is never empty, it's full of meaning. You don't owe anyone a performance of your pain. You don't owe anyone your constant availability. What you owe yourself is peace. What you owe yourself is dignity. And sometimes the loudest way to say, I deserve better, is not with words, but with silence. So after this moment, after this realization, you ignore completely, not out of anger, not out of spite, but out of a deep, unshakable love for yourself. Because silence is not just your boundary, it is your superpower. Silence commands respect because it reflects something that cannot be faked: composure. When someone provokes you, when they test your patience, when they deliberately try to push you into an emotional reaction, the natural instinct is to defend, explain, or lash out. But every time you rush to fill the silence with words, you give away your power. You show them that they can control your state with a single action. What silence does is interrupt that cycle. It communicates that you are not so easily moved, not so quickly shaken, and not desperate for validation. People pay attention to what is rare. Noise is everywhere. Everyone argues, everyone complains, everyone explains themselves over and over again. But silence, real, intentional silence, cuts through the noise like nothing else. It makes people sit up, pay attention, and ask themselves why you're not reacting like everyone else. They expect chaos and you give calm. They expect begging and you give nothing. That nothing is not weakness, it's a loud message. I am not available for this kind of treatment. When you go silent, you take yourself out of someone's game. You're no longer a participant in their drama, their manipulation, or their attempt to make you prove your worth. You show them you don't need their approval to feel secure. That is where respect begins. Respect does not come from over-explaining yourself. Respect does not come from convincing someone to see your value. It comes from showing, through your actions, that you already know your value, and that you don't need to fight for anyone else to see it. This is why silence feels so powerful. It shifts the dynamic immediately. Imagine a heated argument where one person is shouting and the other is simply calm, measured, and quiet. Who looks stronger? Who looks more in control? The one who doesn't need to raise their voice. The one who doesn't need to fill the room with explanations. The one who simply holds their ground with quiet confidence. People respect that presence, even if they don't admit it. There's also an element of self-respect tied to silence. Every time you hold back from arguing with someone who has already shown you their stance, you save your dignity. You stop yourself from pouring energy into a battle that can't be won. Silence says, I am not lowering myself to fight at this level. And that refusal to engage actually elevates you. It preserves your composure and keeps you from regretting words spoken in anger or desperation. Another reason silence commands respect is that it creates contrast. When you're always available, always reacting, always explaining, your words lose impact. They become background noise. But when you deliberately withhold words, when you choose silence, it makes the other person lean in. They start to wonder what you're thinking. They start to question their own behavior. Your silence becomes the mirror that forces them to look at themselves, and often that reflection is uncomfortable. But this doesn't mean silence is about manipulation. It's not about playing games or punishing someone with your absence. True power lies in silence when it is rooted in self-worth. You are not being quiet to make them chase you. You are being quiet because you understand you don't need to justify yourself. You don't need to perform. You don't need to argue. That kind of silence is pure strength because it shows that you are not dependent on anyone else's reaction to define who you are. In a world where people are constantly pressured to respond instantly, whether in conversations, arguments, or even text messages, choosing silence makes you stand out. It tells the other person, I am not on your timeline. I am not controlled by your words. I choose when and how I respond, if at all. That control is deeply respected, even by those who may not like it, because people always notice when they cannot pull you out of your calm. So silence isn't just about the absence of words. It's about the presence of strength. It's the unspoken confidence that says you know your worth, you know your boundaries, and you don't need to raise your voice or fight to prove either. That's why it commands respect in a way that talking, shouting, or arguing never will. Attention is currency because every interaction we have is essentially an exchange of energy. What you give your attention to, you invest in. And just like money, if you spend it recklessly on things that don't yield growth or return, you end up bankrupt, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. People often underestimate how powerful their attention really is. They think ignoring someone is passive, that it doesn't make much of an impact, but in reality, withdrawing attention is one of the strongest signals you can send. It says, you no longer have access to my energy. When you continue to give your attention to someone who treats you poorly, who undervalues you, or who takes you for granted, you are essentially financing their behavior. You are rewarding the very actions that hurt you by showing that no matter what, they will still have your focus. That attention reinforces them. It tells them that they can neglect you, dismiss you, or mistreat you, and you will still be there, still listening, still reacting. But when you cut off that supply, when you reclaim your attention, the message shifts dramatically. It says, this no longer works. You do not get to thrive off my energy. This is why attention is so precious. Think about how society works. Companies fight for your attention every day. Social media platforms are built to capture and hold it for as long as possible. Advertisers spend billions just to get a few seconds of it. Why? Because attention is influence. Attention is power. And the same principle applies in relationships. Whoever has your attention has a kind of control over you. The more you invest it, the more power they have. So when you stop giving it, you take back control. There is also a deep psychological element to attention. Humans crave it, whether they admit it or not. When someone is ignored, when their words or actions no longer create a response, it unsettles them. They start to question their place, their significance, their impact. Attention validates. So removing it invalidates. It denies someone the reinforcement they may have been feeding on. This is why silence and detachment can feel like such a wake-up call to someone who has been careless with your presence. It's important to understand, too, that giving attention isn't just about responding to someone directly. Even thinking about them constantly, replaying scenarios in your mind, checking their social media, or waiting anxiously for a message is still a form of attention. And while it may feel harmless, it's actually draining you. You are spending your most valuable resource, your focus, on someone who is not paying it back with care, respect, or effort. That's why withdrawing attention isn't only about ignoring outwardly, it's also about redirecting your inner energy. When you pull back your attention and redirect it toward yourself, everything changes. Instead of investing it in what someone else is doing or not doing, you invest it in your own growth, your own joy, your own peace. That's when you begin to rebuild your confidence, because you're no longer outsourcing your worth to how much attention they give you in return. You stop measuring your value based on their reactions and instead remind yourself, my attention is precious and I get to choose where to spend it. There's also a power shift that happens when attention is withdrawn. As long as you're pouring attention into someone, they don't have to do much to keep you around. They don't feel the need to invest equally because your energy is already sustaining the dynamic. But when you cut that off, they're faced with a void. They feel the absence, and very often, that absence speaks louder than any words ever could. It makes them realize what they've lost, and it forces them to confront the consequences of taking your energy for granted. This is not about manipulation. It's not about ignoring someone just to provoke a reaction. True strength in withdrawing attention comes from knowing your worth and choosing to no longer invest in a person who doesn't deserve it. It's not a tactic to get them to chase you. It's a decision to honor your value. If they rise to the occasion and earn your attention back, it's because they've recognized what it means. And if they don't, then your attention has been spared from being wasted even longer. Attention also creates meaning. The more you give someone your focus, the more important they feel, and the less you give it, the more they start to wonder why. When someone is used to being the center of your world and suddenly finds themselves on the outside, the contrast is powerful. They may realize they have been feeding off something they didn't earn. They may notice how empty the silence feels compared to the validation they were accustomed to. And that awareness can only happen when attention is withdrawn. Every time you shift your attention, you're essentially casting a vote. You're saying, "This is what matters to me." When you give your attention to someone's inconsistency, their games, their disrespect, you are voting for that behavior to stay in your life. But when you withdraw and redirect that same energy to your own peace, your own progress, your own happiness, you are voting for yourself. You're saying, "I matter more." And that vote counts more than any explanation you could ever give. So attention truly is currency, and where you spend it determines what grows in your life. When you understand its value, you stop giving it away freely to those who haven't earned it. You stop financing behavior that depletes you, and instead, you start investing it wisely in people and places that build you up rather than break you down. Silence creates mystery because it interrupts a pattern that most people expect. In conversations, in conflicts, and especially in relationships, people anticipate a reaction. They expect words, explanations, clarifications, even arguments. When that reaction doesn't come, when instead there is quiet, it unsettles them. It leaves a space, a gap, and the human mind has a natural tendency to fill that gap with questions. What are they thinking? Why aren't they responding? Did I push too far? Are they done with me? That vacuum of silence becomes louder in their head than any speech could have been. Mystery is compelling. It draws attention, it keeps people guessing, and it changes the balance of power. When someone knows exactly what you are thinking, when you always explain yourself and react instantly, there is no intrigue. They feel they can predict you. Predictability may feel safe, but it doesn't inspire respect or fascination. Silence, on the other hand, resists predictability. It makes people wonder, it makes them reflect, and it forces them to confront their own behavior without you spelling it out for them. That curiosity, that uncertainty, is where mystery is born. Think about how attraction works. Often, what draws people in isn't what is immediately obvious, but what is left unsaid. It's the gaps, the spaces, the questions that make someone lean forward and want to know more. Silence is the embodiment of that principle. By holding back your words, you create an aura of depth. You send the message that you are not easy to access, not easy to read, and not desperate to explain yourself. That makes others value your presence more because they realize they can't take it for granted. There's also a psychological weight that silence carries. When someone speaks, you can agree, disagree, or dismiss their words. But when someone is silent, you are left alone with your thoughts. And very often, silence forces people to hear their own conscience louder. In relationships, for example, if someone has treated you poorly, silence doesn't just stop the argument. It makes them reflect on why you've gone quiet. It makes them replay what they said or did. It triggers their awareness in a way that words often fail to do. Words can be debated, silence cannot. It lingers. Mystery is powerful because it disrupts control. If someone is used to you reacting in a predictable way, maybe defending yourself, maybe trying to win them back, maybe explaining your position, They can rely on that pattern. But when you break that pattern with silence, you take that predictability away. They can no longer anticipate your next move. That unpredictability creates an edge, and with it, a sense of intrigue. They want to know where you stand, but your silence denies them that certainty, and that denial often makes them chase answers they once ignored. It's important to understand that mystery doesn't come from playing games. True mystery is not about manipulation or withholding affection just to confuse someone. It's about self-restraint. It's about choosing not to reveal everything at once, not to hand over all of your thoughts and emotions the second they demand it. That kind of restraint communicates strength. It says, I don't need you to know everything about me right now. I reveal myself on my terms, not yours. That quiet confidence is magnetic because it's rare. Silence also elevates the value of your words when you finally choose to speak. If you talk constantly, if you over-explain and fill every gap, your words begin to lose weight. But when you use silence intentionally, when you hold back until the right moment, the words you do share carry far more impact. People listen more carefully because they know you don't speak just to fill space. You speak when it matters. That dynamic alone creates an air of mystery because people know they won't get everything from you easily. Another aspect of mystery in silence is how it reflects independence. When you don't rush to respond, when you don't feel the need to explain yourself endlessly, you show that you are not dependent on someone's understanding to feel secure. That independence is deeply attractive. It suggests that you have a world within yourself that doesn't require constant validation. And the less accessible you make that inner world, the more intriguing it becomes. People are naturally curious about what they can't fully have. Mystery also shifts responsibility. In conflicts, when you argue, the focus is on your words, your defense, your position. But when you remain silent, the other person is left alone with theirs. They are forced to confront what they said or did without you carrying the burden of making them see it. That moment of quiet reflection often does more than any explanation could. They fill the silence with their own guilt, their own questions, their own realizations. And in that way, silence becomes a teacher. There's something timeless about the power of silence. In literature, in art, in human connection, the most compelling figures are rarely the ones who say everything out loud. They are the ones who hold something back, who keep people guessing, who maintain an air of mystery. That doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means being intentional. It means knowing that you don't have to expose every thought, every feeling, every reaction. The more you keep sacred for yourself, the more others want to lean in and discover it. Silence, then, is not empty. It's full of presence, full of unspoken meaning, full of mystery that draws people in rather than pushing them away. It is a reminder that sometimes the most powerful thing you can give is not your voice, but your quiet restraint. That restraint creates space, and in that space, people find themselves wondering, questioning, and realizing what they may not have noticed before. Boundaries speak louder than words because they are actions, not promises. Anyone can say they deserve respect. Anyone can claim they know their worth. But it's what you enforce that shows people what you truly believe about yourself. When someone mistreats you and you argue endlessly, you're still engaging with them. You're still giving them access to your energy. But when you remove yourself, when you stop replying, when you draw a line in silence and refuse to cross it, that's when the message lands. That's when the boundary becomes real. Ignoring toxic behavior is not about pretending it didn't happen. It's about refusing to reward it. Every time you fight with someone who disrespects you, you're showing them that bad behavior still gets a response. Even if that response is anger or pain, it is still attention, and attention fuels them. But when you stay silent, when you disengage, when you make it clear that poor treatment does not buy them your energy, that boundary speaks volumes. It says, you will not have me on these terms. Boundaries are not for other people, they are for you. They are the rules you set for how much of yourself you are willing to give and under what conditions. When you draw those boundaries with silence, you are protecting your peace without needing to shout about it. You are choosing self-respect over performance. And the truth is, people hear silence louder than any speech. Words can be twisted, debated, or ignored. Silence cannot, it is undeniable. There's a certain dignity in not having to explain over and over again why someone's actions are unacceptable. Once you've said it once, you don't need to keep repeating yourself. If they didn't respect it the first time, your silence shows them the consequences of ignoring your needs. You don't threaten, you don't argue, you don't beg. You simply withdraw. And that absence forces them to realize that boundaries aren't negotiable. They are either honored or they cost access to you. This is why boundaries set through silence are so powerful. They are not reactive, they are proactive. Instead of being dragged into another cycle of drama, you step out completely. You take control of your energy and show that you cannot be baited into battles that go nowhere. That kind of restraint isn't easy, but it builds strength. Because every time you resist the urge to explain yourself to someone who doesn't listen, you reinforce your own worth. People often think boundaries push others away, but in reality, they draw the right people closer. When you show that you will not tolerate disrespect, the ones who value you rise to the standard. They learn to treat you better because they don't want to lose access. And the ones who don't respect you, they fall away naturally. That's the beauty of boundaries. They filter out what drains you and make space for what nourishes you. Silence plays a critical role in that filtering process. It creates a pause, a void, and in that void people reveal themselves. Someone who cares will notice your silence and seek to understand. Someone who doesn't care will ignore it and continue as before. Either way, your silence has spoken more clearly than any long explanation could. It has drawn the line, and it has shown you who belongs inside it and who doesn't. Boundaries in silence also protect your self-image. When you get caught in the cycle of defending yourself to someone who refuses to understand, you start doubting your own worth. But when you hold that boundary with quiet certainty, you affirm to yourself, I don't need to convince anyone to treat me well. I only need to enforce the standard. That self-affirmation is far more valuable than winning an argument because it reminds you that you are the authority over your own life. So when you ignore, when you go silent, when you stop rewarding behavior that hurts you, you're not being passive. You're being powerful. You are communicating through action what words could never fully express. And that action, your boundary, echoes louder than any speech ever could. Silence heals you first because it creates the space you need to step back from chaos and return to yourself. When you are constantly reacting, explaining, or defending, you stay entangled in the energy of the other person. You lose clarity because your mind is busy trying to manage their perception, their emotions, their behavior. Silence breaks that cycle. It pulls you out of their storm and allows you to stand in stillness where you can finally hear your own thoughts. That space is where healing begins, because healing requires distance from the noise that keeps reopening the wound. When you stop giving someone your words, you stop feeding the part of yourself that wants to fix, to prove, or to persuade. That silence is not just directed at them, it's a gift to you. It gives your heart the chance to rest from constantly chasing answers. It gives your mind a chance to breathe without rehearsing the same arguments. It allows your body to relax because it no longer feels the stress of conflict pulsing through it. In silence, you come back to balance. You begin to feel your own presence again, separate from the person who disrupted it. Healing through silence also comes from the power of perspective. When you step away from noise, things that felt overwhelming start to look different. Emotions settle. What once felt urgent and impossible to bear becomes more manageable. The distance silence creates gives you clarity. You start to see what actually matters, what was simply ego, and what no longer deserves a place in your life. That clarity is one of the deepest forms of healing because it allows you to release what you were clinging to and reclaim the parts of yourself that got lost in the struggle. Another way silence heals is by protecting your energy. Every argument drains you. Every attempt to explain yourself to someone unwilling to understand is an emotional leak. When you go silent, you close those leaks. You stop handing out your energy to someone who doesn't value it, and you conserve it for yourself. That conservation allows you to rebuild. Instead of scattering yourself into words that fall on deaf ears, you redirect that energy inward to nurture your peace, your passions, your growth. Healing is not just about removing pain, it's about filling yourself back up, and silence creates the space to do exactly that. There is also a spiritual element to silence. In the quiet, you connect more deeply to yourself and often to something greater than yourself. Whether that's your intuition, your values, or your faith, silence makes it easier to hear the whispers that get drowned out in the noise of conflict and distraction. Those whispers remind you of your worth, they guide you toward peace, and they strengthen your ability to let go of what no longer serves you. Healing requires that inner alignment, and silence is the doorway to it. Silence also protects you from regret. When emotions run high, it's easy to say things that cut deeper than you intended, things that add new scars instead of closing old ones. By choosing silence, you protect yourself from adding more weight to carry. You give yourself the chance to respond later with wisdom instead of impulse. That restraint not only preserves your dignity, it keeps the focus on what truly matters, your peace. And that preservation is healing in itself because it allows you to move forward without new wounds to tend to. Silence heals you first because it shifts the focus from them to you. Instead of pouring your attention outward, you turn it inward. You stop asking, "How do I make them see me?" and begin asking, "How do I see myself better? How do I care for me right now?" That shift is everything. It reminds you that your well-being is not dependent on someone else's recognition. It's built on how you choose to honor yourself. And the simplest, most powerful way to honor yourself in moments of chaos is through silence. Silence is not emptiness. It is not weakness. It is power. It is the quiet decision to no longer trade your peace for noise, to no longer spend your energy on what does not serve you, and to no longer explain yourself to those who have already shown they do not listen. Silence commands respect. It protects your energy. It creates mystery. It sets boundaries. And most importantly, it heals you. So the next time you are tempted to react, to explain, to fight for recognition, remember this: you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to chase to be valued. And you don't need to argue to be understood. Your silence already speaks volumes. Use it wisely, because in a world that craves constant noise, silence will always be your greatest superpower. Thank you.